Okay, so we're still in our study of First Corinthians, and we've titled the whole series "How Grace Transforms the Church." Okay, so we keep coming back to this same theme. It comes up in every single chapter. God does have a purpose for us as individuals, but He also has this purpose for us as a corporate people, as the body of Christ. In fact, most of the teaching of the New Testament about God's purpose for us is given to us in the plural. All right, it's not just about God's purpose for me; it's God's purpose for us that is the primary focus. And so Paul's rolling out this whole series of discussions to this church that's in the process of learning what it looks like to come together under the grace of God and to be the people of God. And so we're going to continue that discussion this morning as Paul moves into dealing with what the purpose is for us being the people of God. And so what is our purpose as the church? And the answer that Paul gives has to do with what he's already called our sacred trust. And so the gospel, or the good news, is what this is all about. And Paul brings this up 8 times in the paragraphs leading up to where we are. He's said that God has called us to freedom. Okay, we talked about that, so that we can set things aside that bind us down. That's the kind of freedom that God gives us, is the freedom to let go of things, and so that we can really serve one another, and so that we can identify with people in a culturally appropriate way. That's what Josh talked about last week. And that's because we have this thing that's worth sharing, all right, this sacred trust that's worth talking about. And it is very good news, okay, that God has moved towards His creation, towards us. He's offered us new life and reconciliation, the opportunity for forgiveness by His grace. Okay, there's a compelling vision there at the heart of the Christian message. And then, as the people of God, the question for us is, what does it look like for us to effectively steward the trust that God has given to us? Okay, this message of reconciliation that's been given to us. And so that question should have some kind of impact on how we think about our lives. And so that's exactly the subject that Paul turns to here at the end of this chapter. He's going to talk about spiritual goals, and he's going to talk about the idea of discipline and reward. And so we're just going to start by taking a look right at these 4 verses that we're talking about. We're in 1 Corinthians 9, 24 through 27. He says, "Don't you realize that in a race everyone runs, but only one person gets the prize? So run to win. All athletes are disciplined in their training. They do it to win a prize that will fade away. But we do it for an eternal prize. So I run with purpose in every step. I'm not just shadow boxing. I discipline my body like an athlete, training it to do what it should. Otherwise, I fear that after teaching others, I myself may be disqualified." So that's a pretty interesting paragraph, actually. He says that he runs as to win, and that he runs with purpose with every step. All right, now I know that some of you are runners, okay? I'm not a runner. I'm very bad at running, all right? I have done my share of running, and frankly, I've had enough, okay? So at this point, I like to say that I am philosophically opposed to the idea of running. But there have been times that I have been a runner. I ran track in school. I understand what it takes to be a runner, and it takes regular running, right? And I refuse right now to run regularly, all right? There's just not enough at stake for me, okay? Like I'm healthy enough to suit me. I have enough energy to go longer than I need to each day. And so there's not enough payoff to make the absolute misery of running in Florida worth it to me. All right. So I also know some people, some of you, in fact, that are like athletes. Okay. I'm not an athlete. All right. I enjoy athletics and I have been an athlete, but at this point in the game, and for many years now, no. Okay. I'm not an athlete. An athlete is willing to do the repetitive hard work to cultivate like all the muscle memory that they need and the strength and the skill to be at the top, to potentially win. And what Paul's saying here is that there are things that are really so worth it, and there is so much at stake that it's worth putting in the kind of hard work that a real athlete puts in. Okay, he's not talking about a 2-mile jog every month and a half where you walk part of the way because you have a cramp. He's talking about something that is really worth running for. All right, there's a race that's worth winning. There's a purpose that really is important. Okay, it's not just shadow boxing where you're fighting your own shadow. Okay, Paul's talking about actually landing the punches. So this is the attitude that Paul had toward the Christian life, and this is what he demonstrated in his life. Okay, this is also the attitude that he's trying to call these Corinthian people to. And what he's really talking about is being goal-focused or goal-oriented in your spiritual life. All right? And there is a difference between having goals and having desires. Okay, we all have plenty of desires. All right? Things that come into our minds or that we see we want. And so maybe we would like to speak another language, or we would like to write a book, or whatever. Okay? A desire is something that you want or that you would like to have, but you're not necessarily doing anything to get those things. Okay? Goals are a little bit different than that. And it's true that sometimes goals are the fulfillment of a desire, but a goal is different in that a goal connects values with actions, and it creates accomplishment. Okay, a desire is just a feeling or a thing that you would like. And a goal has a lot more to do with my will. Okay, a goal takes a value that you have, something that you think is important or that you think matters, and connects it with an action or a series of actions to produce accomplishment. Okay, that's a goal. And you can call your desires your goals, but if you're not doing anything, then they're not actually goals. They're just things that you desire. And so as an example of a goal, my son gets up every morning with a goal in mind. And his goal is to eat something. All right? He has a value for not being hungry. And he connects the value with the action of making himself a bowl of cereal or whatever. All right? And he accomplishes this goal every single morning. To just desire some food is not at all the same thing. Okay, that would leave you very, very hungry before too terribly long. And so sometimes we are aware of our goals and sometimes we're not. And sometimes our goals are about things that are very important and sometimes they're not. But be very clear on this point. We are all goal-directed. Okay, this is one of the things that's unique about being human. We're not automatons or cosmic wind-up toys that just do whatever we're pre-built to do. We are conscious, free choosing beings that are able to consider what it is that really matters and what's important and what things are truly significant. Even if we never actually consider any of those things, we are able to consider those things. And then, by the force of our own will, we're able to choose a course of action that accomplishes whatever it is that we decided was important. When Genesis 2 tells us that we're created in the image of God, this is a pretty big part of that. God is very much into goal-centered activity. He created the human race and the cosmos that we live in as part of a goal-centered activity. That stuff was done for a reason. It joins his value of being a creative and relational being with a course of action where he spoke into being things that were not. And then, after that fiasco that went down in the Garden of Eden, where humanity decided to go their own way without the guidance of God, and the relationship between humanity and God was pretty broken, even after all that, God remains extremely goal-oriented. Both the Old Testament and the New Testament teach that the entire purpose of history is this goal that God has for reconciling his lost creation back to himself. Okay, Isaiah is very clear that that's the goal and the intent of God. This is the point of all God's work in the world. The value that he has is that he loves his creation, even though they've rebelled. And his action is that he moved into our world and did what only he could do. He took upon himself the burden of the guilt and the sin of all of humanity so that we could be reconciled to him. And those that have received him can take that message to those who have not. And then all can have the opportunity to be reconciled to God. Okay, that's God's goal, and that's what God's all about in our world. He's very goal-directed, and he calls his people to join him and to also be goal-directed. All right, so that's kind of what we're talking about this morning. But some of us may have some internal resistance to this notion, all right? Goal setting. It sounds a little carnal, all right? And it sounds like you're taking the reins and not really trusting God. And the idea that I might make a plan and start setting goals and working to achieve those goals just doesn't sound very spiritual at all. And honestly, by disposition, I fall squarely into this camp. All right, so I'm not inclined towards plans and goal setting. I'm more of a, well, let's just kind of see where God leads kind of guy. But my inclinations are not really something that I'm required to be a slave to. All right, I think we did a teaching on that a couple of weeks ago. And we need to think this through because Paul is clearly saying that he is goal-centered. And he's clearly telling these people that they need to also be this way. So there's a problem here. My inclination or my psyche is missing something about goal setting in this spiritual sense. And I think that sometimes when we think about things like goal setting, there are some imbalances that are pretty common to this area of thinking. For instance, a lot of people for whom goal setting and being activistic comes pretty naturally, they can be significantly self-willed. Okay, some people are so in the moment and anti-goal that they're basically just an amorphous blob that are going nowhere. All right, but then there are these other people that are so planned and that have it all figured out, that if they go anywhere at all, it will surely be where they want to go. And it's going to have very little to do with something silly like the will of God. All right? And so you pain in the butt type A's are often very naturally like this. And the rest of us tend to see you as self-willed and pretty unspiritual. And that's often an accurate way to assess the way that you live. So we may feel that goal setting is unspiritual because we associate the idea with the people that we see as unspiritual. We may also associate goal setting with the self-serving person. Okay, so we've all known people that have a very clear agenda that has everything to do with them. And when you see these people coming, you kind of want to cross to the other side of the street. Okay, you know that they have a goal. You know that they're on a mission to see their goals for your life fulfilled. And you frankly just aren't that interested. All right, so we rightly worry about goal-mindedness when we associate it with people like that. There's also this problem where goal-minded people, the doers, the ones that are into accomplishing things, often see the things they want to accomplish as more important than people. Okay, it just leaves a bad taste in our mouth when we hear people talking about being goal-centered, because it makes us think that the person is really just about business and not so much about people. Okay, we see that they're into things that are about them and not about the things of God. Okay, it's your plan, not God's plan that we're talking about. And there's also the danger of failure that's involved when you start setting specific goals. Okay, failure is something that most of us try to avoid. All right, we're afraid of failure. But the reality is that a significant number of the goals that people set, they fail to meet. Okay, maybe you have set some goals in your life at some point. Maybe they were even important goals or significant spiritual goals. You've had goals that you strived for, but it just didn't happen. And then for months or maybe even years, you're like licking your wounds. And you've just come to the conclusion that the whole goal thing doesn't really work. But the important thing to realize here is that failure is an important part of this process. Okay, the fact is that even if we set real and godly goals, that doesn't mean that they'll always work out. And your goals not working out does not mean that your values were wrong or even that your action was wrong. Okay, athletes fail. They don't all win. Okay, all kinds of things happen in competition. But the question is the value that you're serving significant enough to drive you to dust yourself off and get back in the fight? Okay, that's a question that many people who have been walking with Christ for a while and have tasted some disappointment in their Christian life need to ask themselves. Okay, failure is a part of life, even a Christian life. Okay, it's not a reflection on the things that you value. It's something that you learn from so that when you go back to setting new goals, you can move forward with them and give yourself over to them because it's the right thing to be into, not because you're somehow going to win. Okay, and so if you fail, you fail. If you don't fail, then good on you, right? If you're going to be a risk taker with your Christian life, then that's kind of an attitude that you need to have. We're going to need to dream big and plan big, and failure is a very real possibility. But that doesn't really make any difference at all. Okay, you move forward and you move after the goal and you go for it. Everyone who accomplishes things that are really significant knows that this is true. Okay, most new businesses fail. It's the fourth or the fifth business that you start that might succeed. Okay, we learn from our mistakes and by our values. We're not undone by these things. And it's important for us to realize that setting goals is actually spiritual, and that it's clearly what Paul's teaching here. All right, there are imbalances about it that we need to be aware of, but on the more important and more positive side of this, there's a real stewardship of the talents that God has given you. All right, and God is very interested in your using the talents that he has given you. All right, you know the story, Matthew 25. Jesus tells the parable of the talents. The master gives the one person 10 talents, another person gets 5, the last guy gets 2. The master goes on a trip and he tells the guys to use the talents wisely. And so Jesus is communicating this idea that God has created each one of us to be a steward. We're supposed to be someone that is invested in this sacred trust that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, and which I already mentioned this morning. All right, God has a goal for the world, and he's calling us into that goal of reaching lost people with the message that will enable them to draw close to him. And that is a sacred trust. Okay, can you even imagine that the God of the universe is calling you into this work of saving souls for eternity? What could possibly be more important than that? And to that end, he has given us talents, right? He's given us abilities. Your life is not an accident. All right, he's given you your personality. Other people may find you extremely irritating, but God does not. God made your personality and your intellect. He's given you your moment in time, your place on the earth. None of these things are an accident. He's shaped and he's molded you for this work in this moment. And he's also shaped other people for the moment of crossing paths with you. Okay, so maybe you're here investigating this whole God thing. Then it's not an accident that you're here. All right, God has put the promptings that are in your heart and the thoughts in your mind that have alerted you to the poignancy of this question. Okay, and even beyond that, he has brought people into your life. Your life has intersected with theirs because of the divine moment that God has orchestrated so that you can think about what God's purpose for your life really is. Okay, what is God's goal for you? Your life is not an accident. No one's life is an accident. All right, that's a really important idea. When God entrusts us with the talents that we really do have, then it matters a lot how we use them. It matters, and we'll be accountable for how we use them. And we have the opportunity to take the things that he has given us and really steward this incredible trust that he's given to us. And we're going to have the opportunity to answer for what we do with those talents at the end of history. Okay, we're going to look at this question a little bit more in a bit, but it's important that it's something that's in our minds. The third thing here that addresses whether or not goal setting is spiritual, and clearly it is not only does God have a plan and a design for your life, and we can set real goals to involve ourselves in his plan and use our talents to accomplish his work, but also in doing that, we find that over time, our spiritual life is not really separated from our work life and our hobby life and our family life. Okay, we actually can figure out that if we have clearly defined spiritual goals for our lives, then they kind of bring the whole thing together. Our life starts to take on like a symmetry and a coherence. Your life may even start to make some sense. And some of you are sitting here this morning and your life feels all fractured. You're doing all these different things, but they don't really add up to anything that's very substantial or even very fulfilling. You may like all the different things that you're doing, but they don't really fit together in a life that's cohesive and makes sense to you and would make sense to people who were looking at your life. Okay, it's people that are driven by a sense of purpose, that have like an added dimension that just brings it all together into something that makes sense. And wouldn't it be satisfying to look at the entire breadth of your life and say that you're involved in many things, but they all fit together into this one thing that I'm really about? Okay, there's really only one thing that can make sense out of the entirety of your life. And that's if the goals of your life are aligned with God's goals for your life. And when you're at the place where these promptings become clear and you can really see what God's plan is for your life and how to fit your own spiritual goals into that, then there's something very satisfying about that. It's very cool when your agenda and God's agenda are clearly aligned and making some sense out of things. So this is all a bit subjective and abstract maybe, but it's also very real. Okay, it is possible that we should think about setting some spiritual goals, all right, like Paul does here. Not shadow boxing, not going for the occasional jog or walk, but actually training and running the race so that you might actually win. Okay, how about that picture of like leaning into the tape and trying to finish the race with the best possible result? How about living a life of focus and a life of purpose? Okay, we should definitely do that. It seems clear to me that the Bible talks about a couple of goals that could be significant for some of this. I'm just going to call this one being goals, okay? We're human beings, not human doings. And the goals that God calls us to often have to do with who we are as people. And that means that there are some important goals that we could have that would help us to more intentionally relate to God. Most close relationships should have goals associated with them. All right, your relationship with your spouse, your kids should have goals. If they don't have any goals, then that may explain a few things. Okay, without goals in what it looks like to love and relate to your spouse or your kids, then you're really just motivated by the feelings of the moment and the record of what they have done for you lately. To relate and to deepen in your relationship with anybody, then you're going to need to think about what you should do to effectively move toward this other person. If you've never done anything like this, then I would definitely recommend it. Okay, this works in any human relationship. If you don't do anything like this, then the trajectory is very much in the other direction. You have to be very intentional about spending time and cultivating relational openness. And all of the same things are true in our relationship with God. To be intentional here means that God has moved towards me, and I have an opportunity to respond to him, to cultivate relationship with him. And it turns out that he's given us some tools to do that with. Okay, like the Word of God. And it is possible for us to sit down and read the Word, and we can come to the quite incredible realization that we are reading the words of God. All right, we're reading his letter to us. He wants to talk to you. And having a being goal in relation to God might be to spend just a little bit of time meeting him regularly in his word. And that is likely more time than you're currently spending. And for a few of us, this seems like a pretty natural thing. But for most of us, it really isn't. But we need to learn how to think in a goal-centered way about how we relate to God. All right, it's pretty important. For me, the studying part and the reading the Bible part comes pretty easy. All right, it happens pretty regularly. I like that stuff. But I'm not very good at quieting myself and talking intimately with God. All right, prayer in the way that really brings God and I closer is not really a strong point for me. It's more work for me than the studying part. So for me to be intentional in my relationship with God means that I have to operate against my base inclination. All right, it's not okay for me to just explain away not praying with the statement that I'm just not a prayer guy. All right, I have to deliberately carve out time and just sit with God. Prayer is a discipline for some of us. And it's a worthy spiritual goal that we really can achieve. And so I would encourage each one of you to work on this. What does it look like for you to deepen your relationship with God? You need to be goal-centered about that. There are also doing goals, right? The Bible talks a lot about these things. Okay, it is spiritual. It is God's will for you to establish goals that are glorifying to him. So, for instance, Paul says that the goal of our instruction is love. Okay, right there. It's his goal. Okay, what he taught and how he related to these people would have the effect that they would understand in a deeper way and be drawn into a more authentic view of the love of God. That was a goal for him. That was a doing goal. Okay, it was about, how he could communicate effectively along these lines. And then in 2 Timothy 2, he says, be diligent to present yourself as a worker who is unashamed, handling accurately God's word. This is another spiritual goal that is about doing. Do you accurately handle God's word? Are you able to understand it and then communicate it? All right, instead of just like street smarts or Facebook wisdom, can you offer people the real word of God when they're in need? And if not, then that's a problem that has a solution. All right, but you need to have that as a goal. It needs to be something specific and measurable. And I believe that each one of us should spend some time thinking and come up with something that is specific and measurable, that God would have you set as a goal, that would enhance your spiritual relationship with him, or would enhance your capacity to serve him with your life. All right, think about that. God calls us to land our punches and to run in such a way that we might win. We're called to set real goals and to seek to attain those goals. And if we're paying any attention at all, then we certainly realize that these goals don't just take care of themselves. All right, Paul says things like, all athletes are disciplined in their training, and I discipline my body like an athlete, training it to do with what it should. And the word that's the focus of this stuff is discipline. Okay, discipline is not just something that frustrated parents meter out to unruly children. From the biblical point of view, discipline is a way of living. It's a life in training because we have a goal. There's an aim, there's a finish line. We're in a race where there really are things at stake. Cannot afford to just go for a jog when you feel like it. It's about disciplining my body to cooperate with the lofty goals that God has called each one of us to. And so, Paul's talking about discipline. Okay? Not one single thing that matters is easy. I wish it were easy, but it just isn't. Okay, you have to work to accomplish anything that matters. And you may not be super into sports, all right? I'm not super into sports. But you know who Michael Jordan is, right? And wouldn't you like to live life like Michael Jordan played basketball? Effortlessly. Head and shoulders above the competition. It would erect a statue to you because you were so great. But the thing about Jordan was that no one had ever seen anyone practice as hard and as long as he did. Right? He was the first one at practice and the last one to leave. Every single aspect of the game was the subject of like constant repetition and preparation. And that's exactly why when it was game time, it looked like it was just easy and natural. All the hand-eye coordination and muscle memory was already developed. He understood everything about the game because he was disciplined in his approach to practice. And that's why, in this passage, Paul is pointing us to look at athletes. Okay, there's a lot to learn here about excellence in accomplishing the purpose that you set out to accomplish. And so for us, the purpose is different than it is for an athlete. But the idea of preparation and setting goals is not different. Nothing that matters comes easily. And it always requires discipline. Because our resolve will be tested. Okay, and so maybe you have yourself a little moment of conviction and you realize that you do need to set some spiritual goals and get your life in line. So you begin to pursue those goals. And then some stuff gets in the way. Okay, so I live with a woman that often gets up at 4:30 in the morning. And she spends a lot of that time in the morning praying and reading and collecting herself for the day. And even though my inclination is to think that there's something terribly wrong with her, that she would willingly subject herself to this, it did occur to me that she might be onto something. I should try that. All right, shouldn't my day start with something like that, right? So at various times I've been stimulated to try and do something like that. But the 4:30 thing, I just can't. All right, I am a lot more likely to see 4:30 a.m. from still being awake than I am to see it from waking up in the morning. So 5:30 seems just as unreasonable. I've been asleep for like 3 hours at that point. So 6:30 is about the best I can do. But I naturally can see that there's something positive to this kind of discipline. All right, it's good. and it exposes some of my weakness. I do not have the resolve to accomplish this little goal of getting up early in the morning. I'm a failure. So I have to find other ways to stay at it and to work this time in. Okay, so discipline is painful. It costs something. And skill development can be very challenging. Okay, if you actually want to be the kind of person that has a dynamic effect on the spiritual lives of the people that you interact with, then you're probably going to need to develop some skills. Okay, having the kind of impact that you need to have on people doesn't just happen to you. It's a capacity that we develop as a skill. The capacity to listen to people, actually hear what they're saying, and a sense of what they're afraid to say. That's a skill. To be able to effectively communicate the truths of God in a gracious way is a skill. And I don't believe that there's anyone that naturally has the skill to do these things. I've met a lot of people that are amazingly good at these things. But in every case, it's because they developed and cultivated the skill. Okay, and it's hard sometimes to try and learn to do new things. But it's much, much easier if it's something that you want to learn to do. All right, so maybe then we could give a little attention to why we do or do not want to learn to do these things. Okay, so our skill development is going to be on one side, and our resolve is going to be on the other, and we'll have some important decisions to make. And the decisions are going to define what our life looks like and the legacy that we leave to the people that we care the most about. Okay, this stuff matters. God's goals for our lives are usually a huge amount loftier than our own are. We settle for things that are manageable and doable. And God has in mind that we should have plans and goals for our lives that only He can accomplish. And we wonder sometimes why we don't experience crazy supernatural things going on in our groups and in our lives. Besides the fact that we're mostly blind to these kinds of things, it's because our sights are set so low that we're not even able to perceive what's going on around us. Okay, we need to be the person that sets spiritual goals and is available to God and willing to stand in there and be God's guy on the ground, even knowing that there will be times of disappointment and times when my resolve won't hold out and times when it seems like my skills aren't progressing. And so those last are the times when discipline comes into play. We have to be able to go back to our real lives and determine what it is that really matters to us. Okay, we have to have the right answer to this values question. What are you really about? Why does your life matter? What has God called you to? The answers to these questions will determine your ability to stand in there over long periods of time and develop the way that God intends for you to. Okay, Paul said the same thing to Timothy. He said, discipline yourself for the purpose of being godly. Do not neglect your spiritual gift. Take pains with these things. Be absorbed in them so that your progress will be evident to all. Pay close attention to yourself and your teaching. Persevere in these things. That's a lot of advice packed into a couple of sentences. Look at the language that he uses, though. Discipline yourself. Do not neglect. Take pains. What are you taking pains with in your life? Most of us are trying to ease our pain. Most of us are looking for more comfort, and we settle for so much less than what God has for us. Okay, Paul told Timothy to take pains. Don't settle. Take pains with these things. He says to be absorbed. To be absorbed in something is like to be fully immersed. And as a consequence of the immersion, he says that there will be progress. And that progress will be evident to all. So that's true of every serious-minded and goal-oriented person. You can look at them and you can see that their lives are changing. You can see that progress is being made. It's not accidental. They're working at it, and you can see it. And when people begin to take seriously the things that matter, you can see it in their lives. They change. Their capacities change. People recognize it. So how about you? What are the people around you recognizing in your life? Where are you making progress? It's a ridiculously important question. And then Paul says to pay close attention to yourself. This thing that you're cultivating. Okay, Paul knows that all discipline requires and involves perseverance. Okay, it's kind of heavy stuff. It's advice for the Christian life at the deep end of the pool. All right, if you want to drink milk out of a bottle and wear a diaper with a waterproof shell and splash around with the toddlers, that's on you. All right, but you're missing the adventure that God has intended for you. If you're going to dive into the deep end and swim with the grown-ups, then you're going to need a mindset like what Paul is trying to impart on Timothy here. Okay, we're talking about what really defines us and what our lives are about, and we're looking to excel at the task before us. Okay, so if you're serious about this, then you're going to need a personal trainer. So most of us would accept that it's a really good idea if you're serious about going to the gym to spend some time at least with a trainer. Okay, they help you stay in the fight. They crack the whip when you need it. They'll be your cheerleader when you need it. They know more than you do about what needs to be done and what to expect, and they're able to put your experience into the context of what's healthy, what's appropriate for you. Okay, so the Bible has an arrangement for people that want the same thing in a spiritual context. The Bible calls it being a disciple or being in a discipling relationship. To be a disciple of Christ means that you're going to find mentors and people to disciple you in the areas of spirituality. Okay, you're supposed to be in Christian relationships with people that can help you discipline yourself, just like what Paul was doing for Timothy. Okay, it would be a person that knows a little bit more than you do, maybe is a little further down the path. It would be a person that can inject a little objectivity into your life that you may lack for yourself. And it is really hard to find an effective Christian who doesn't have in their life people who are speaking to them about the spiritual matters in their life, right? So they can see more clearly than you can, and they can provide feedback that adjusts the course so that you have a prayer of winning the race, all right? There are no real athletic runners that don't have a coach. Okay, so do you have someone in your life like that? You need to have that. Every one of us needs that. We need mentors to help us move forward in our Christian life. Last point. Of the people that run the race, he says they do it to win a prize that will fade away, but we do it for an eternal prize. Paul's talking to people that live smack dab in the middle of Greece, and they're really into things like the Olympic Games and stuff like that. Okay, he's relating to them on their terms. And the Greeks did this kind of weird thing where they almost worshipped athletes. They really elevated their importance and put them on a pedestal. Maybe that isn't that weird for some of you. Let's just take a look at pro football for a second. It takes a ton of skill and discipline and ability and just plain work to play pro football. Okay? Now, how much more work does it take to get into the Hall of Fame? All right, those are the guys that really have dedicated their life to the sport, right? And what is their reward for that? They get the likeness of their head cast in a metal that we have not really had a use for since the Iron Age began. A bronze bust. That's what they get. So it's like a useless physical object that if we were to really try to find the best use for it, it would basically be to prop open a door. The most gifted and driven men that we can imagine have spent their entire lives to achieve a thing that not only has no eternal value, it barely has usefulness here. Okay, that's what they got up in the morning and worked for and trained for. It's a bronze bust of their head. Don't settle for a bronze bust of your head. That's what Paul's talking about here. That's what he just said. What are you settling for? What's the reward that you're striving for? Is it a robust IRA? Is it more letters after your name? Is it more people telling you how great you are? Those are all okay things. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with any of those things, but they're nowhere near enough. They're not worthy of spending the entirety of your life on. Paul says that there's a reward. How's this for a reward? How about hearing from God? In the parable of the talents that we mentioned earlier, Jesus tells us that the master says at the end to the servant that was a good steward, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful with a few things, and I will put you over many things. Enter into the joy of your master." Enter into the joy of your master. That sounds to me like it might be a better reward than a bronze bust of your head. Okay, you and God are going to meet one day face to face. And your eyes are going to engage one another. And you're looking into the eyes of the almighty creator of the universe and your Savior. And he sees you with recognition. And he says, "Well done. You were faithful. Enter into my joy." All right, I say that day is the real reward. That means everything. Okay, it means something for eternity. It means that my life was not in vain. In the most ultimate sense possible, my life mattered. And Jesus is saying that this day is coming, and you can have that reward. Paul talks about completing life's course. It's another important idea. He says shortly before he's executed, "Fulfill your ministry. I'm already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure has come. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the course. I have kept the faith. In the future there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award me on that day. And not only me, but everyone who have loved his appearing. I have finished the course." It's actually very cool language. All right, there is a course for your life. It's not fate in the sense that you don't have a choice, but God does have a purpose for your life. And in that sense, God has a course for your life. So seek him out on that. Okay, you have some level of understanding. You have all of the resources that you need to have ever-increasing understanding. And like Paul, we can come to a place where we realize that we're doing the things that God has put us on the earth to do. Okay, that would be something pretty cool. There's a course for your life, and you can look in the rearview mirror and you can see the tapestry of your own life making perfect sense in the light of the purpose that you were here for. That is exactly what God wants for you. He wants you to know that you're doing what you were put here to do. There's this last motivation that the scriptures speak to that is the joy of being part of the whole thing. Okay, being a part of the family of God. Being a part of the community through whom God is shaping eternity is reward unto itself. Thessalonica is just north of Corinth, and Paul says to his friends there, "You are our glory and joy." That's true. Okay, when you're putting goals to your life about the things that matter and the people who are at the center of it all, and you're being used by God to effectively in their lives make change, there's joy. And there's a connection and a sense of fulfillment that can't come from any place else. All right, so that's kind of it, but I'm going to leave you this morning with this question. What are you planning to accomplish with your life? I can't think of very many more questions that would be more important than this one. And I do think that we need to deliberately work toward God's answers to that question. So, I'm done.